Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Welcome virtually to the Denos Museum Center in Traverse City, Michigan, and to Dex's apartment in our home in Brooklyn. We are here today to discuss his exhibition, Storied Portraits, which opened up a couple of weeks ago and will run through the end of the month. My name is Jason Dake. I am the Deputy Director of Museum Programs and Learning here at the museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you here. We are here today, as I mentioned, with Dex Jones. He's a Brooklyn, New York born photographer who utilizes seductive color and endearing honesty to surpass what is superficial and create a mood that highlights what is his reality. Jones is driven by an infectious passion that is distinctly exposed in the strong subjects he portrays. That desire is translated in the regality of his images, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Influenced by the cultural richness of his Caribbean heritage and Pan-African studies, Jones unwaveringly removes the veil of self-conscious inhibition by eliminating the preconceived sense of beauty and reveals its true splendor in its vulnerable state. So I'm happy to welcome Dex here this morning. And Dex, the hard question is always the first one. How are you?
That's the worst question. I'm very good. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to just like be able to share my work with people as far out as Michigan, and I'm just grateful that you guys hosted some of my work.
Yeah, and how has this year been as a photographer? We've been asking this of our artists that we meet with because we think it's important to have that discussion. You know, what has this year meant for you with everything that's been happening and going on, health-wise and other things?
Health-wise, you know, I've for the most part, I'm assuming you're including 2020 in.
Yes, yeah.
Health-wise, I've really, for the most part, have just been like, you know, doing the right thing and just like staying indoors and trying to keep away from people.
Easy to do in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah, for the most part. Towards the end of the year, I started working. The end of last year, I started working. So like I do have to go out every day. But you know, that's just like a kind of like a necessary thing at this point. But yeah, 2020, oddly enough, has been not so much a year of creating for me, but it still has been a year where I get to like, because of platforms like this, I do get to like show my work and stuff like that, which is probably most important to me at this stage in my life. It's been a while since I've had like solo exhibitions. So like last year was my second one, and this would be my third. And I kind of feel like in order for me to kind of like cross over into the next phase of my creativity, I kind of just like needed to have this moment to give my work, the past work that I did, a moment to be appreciated and sit up on some walls and have people view them.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a great way to approach it.
That's really why I make the work, you know?
Exactly, yeah, and it's a great way to approach it. I know some of the other artists we've talked to have kind of said, well, it hasn't changed my life much. I've been in the studio working nonstop and I stay away from people anyway, right? Yeah. But the other side of it is, you know, maybe the work slows down, but the opportunities to show it off then become a focus, and you can kind of find a way to make sure that's still working.
I mean, well, it's been kind of the reverse for me, because so much of the work I do involves people. It's having to distance. I mean, I generally I keep to myself for the most part anyway. I'm just like that typical artist recluse. But when in terms of creating, I normally need to like collaborate with people and work with other people. So I haven't been able to do that as much over the last year. But weirdly enough, in me not doing that, I'm still able to show my work. So it's weird. It's a weird phenomenon that's happening.
Sure. So I wanted to, for folks that maybe aren't familiar with your work or who you are as a person and an artist, just give you a few moments. Tell us a little bit about your background. Where you grew up, how you got into photography as your choice of medium. I know you're born in Brooklyn, so just kind of give us a sense of where you come from and maybe how that influenced your work today. It's a really long question, but
yeah, that's a loaded one. But again, I'm from Brooklyn, born and raised. I grew up in Canarsie, which is kind of like a distant, far out neighborhood in Brooklyn. That's on the far east side of Brooklyn, and it's almost purely residential. There's not really much reason for the average New Yorker to go to Canarsie. But that's where I was from. That's where I was raised. And I was raised by three women: my mother, my two aunts, and my grandmother. Four women in the same household, and I have an older brother as well that I grew up with. And yeah, I think that strong female influence shows up in my work a lot. I got into photography. I mean, when I was young, I kind of always knew that I wanted to be an artist in some way. I didn't know exactly in what way yet. So I was doing a lot of experimenting. So like in my earlier years, I used to draw a lot. So I used to think that I was going to be like a comic artist or like a artist for Disney or something like that, even though I probably wasn't that talented to do that. But at some point in like towards the later years in high school, I decided that I got into spoken word. So I kind of figured like that's what I was going to do with my life. I thought that spoken word was going to be how I made it in the world and how I paid the bills and survived and all of that stuff. Just my young self talking. So I was doing a lot of performing, getting up on stage and performing a lot. I had like this grand dream of like being on HBO's Def Poetry one day, and stuff like that. And I think it was in college. I was taking a graphic design major. And I got into college again, not necessarily knowing what I wanted to get out of it, but I knew I wanted to be in the arts. So I kind of figured like, oh, graphic design is something I could do. It's kind of like a nice middle ground. So I started doing that, and there was I had to take 2 photography courses as a requirement for the major. And that's kind of how I got introduced into photography. I took one film class and one digital class. And again, I wasn't necessarily the greatest in those courses, but I developed a love and an appreciation for it enough to want to continue doing it after I left school. So, I just kept, afterwards, I kind of just like became self-taught, and it was just like shooting as much as I can and like learning how this thing all worked. And I did a lot of bad photo shoots before I ended up doing a lot of good ones, So yeah, that's pretty much how I got here to keep that answer as brief as I possibly can.
Yeah, right. So have you then primarily?
I'm sorry, how much time do we have?
Oh, there is no hard limit on this. We usually try to go about an hour, but we've got time.
Okay, sure.
I was curious. So you mentioned some bad photo shoots and things in your earlier years. So have you primarily always been more focused on portraits and human figures and that kind of thing, or have there been elements of doing other kinds of things with your photography?
It's pretty much always been portraiture. For some reason it never occurred to me to do anything else until much later. I started to develop an interest in like doing travel photography and landscapes and stuff like that, but I haven't really traveled much. but when I did travel, I did try to like implement that, the little I did travel. Um, but yeah, for some reason, it just never occurred to me to do anything else. I think just around me, people kind of just like wanted their photos taken, and I wanted to take photos of people. So I kind of was just like fulfilling a need, both for them and for myself. Um, and I kind of, I guess I kind of just felt like it was the best way to kind of like um, develop the craft, you know.
Sure. Yeah, and it's immediate, right? You have people around you.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You can take photos of quicker than whatever is far away from you. It's a practical kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Artists are very practical people a lot of times. So
Yes.
I can
And,
appreciate that.
and around that time, it was kind of like when the internet was like was in like its pubescent stage, if where like everybody was kind of like, it was a time where everybody was kind of like trying to do something. Um, and there was like a lot of platforms that catered to those people. So like there were sites like Model Mayhem, which was kind of like a forum or a hub for like photographers and models and makeup artists and fashion designers to kind of just like come together and like try to set things up so to work together creatively and collaborate. Um, so that was a big thing. So like I was heavily on there, and meeting other photographers through there. Um, so yeah, it kind of just like made working with people a lot easier.
Looking at your work, so I'm gonna kind of move around the gallery a little bit and use the camera on some of your images. I also do have slides that I can share in the screen, so there at some point that may make more sense. But that first question I wanted to kind of get into, and we can sort of pick a photo that maybe works as a good starting point for that. Was this choosing a model or collaborating with a person, right? That is your model in your photographs, and if you could talk a little bit about how that works, if it's friends or again like this professional site you're kind of working through, what are the kinds of processes that lead to that, and then you talk about collaborating with them. So I'd like to hear more about that. What does that mean when you're collaborating with the model?
I think maybe the best example to use would probably be Say It to My Face, the woman with the mask.
Sure. So let's go over to that one here.
Okay, so for the record, like none of the work that's up here was facilitated by like me meeting anyone on Model Mayhem. Model Mayhem had pretty much like come and gone in terms of like its cool factor, I guess. Plus, like so many other like Instagram had been out at the time, so like people were kind of like meeting each other on Instagram and stuff like that. Um, I met this woman via Instagram, I believe, or maybe Facebook. I don't remember. But like we had met each other. We had like been following each other on some social media platform for a while, I think, before we actually got together to collaborate. And usually when I'm working with people, I kind of just like reach out to them, and I see something in them that kind of like speaks to me and just makes me want to do something with them. I tend to be very open and non-concrete about my creative process and my creative ideas. Um, so like I'll say I just want to work with them and not necessarily know what I want to do, or yeah, necessarily what I want to do at the time. But like a lot of times, like it depends on like things that I have. Like for instance, like if I know if I'm working in a studio, like I want to uh, contribute something that something new that I have, or something that I necessarily haven't done or worked with before. Um, so I think that's where like that backdrop comes into play. Like I had recently got that backdrop, so I was like, oh, I'm gonna use this a lot more in my work. Um, but with her, she came and with a lot of the people that I work with, I try to like make it a open, um, like an open dialogue in terms of like what's going to be done. Like I often tell them that like you can come with whatever ideas that you have, and I'll come with whatever ideas that I have, and we'll find some way to just like mesh those two things together if they work, or we'll just see what works and stuff like that. So, and a lot of times most of the times I don't plan enough to the point where like I don't even necessarily tell them what to bring or ask to see what they would bring. Um, so with her name is Life Silva, by the way. Um, she uh, she came with this mask that she had made. I'm not sure why she made the mask. I'm assuming that like she made it in some class or something, or just like some project that she did. And it was basically just like a cast mask of her own face, um, and that she had painted gold. I thought that was cool, and I figured that like that's something that I've never done before. I've never um, had anything like that in any of my work. And I thought it looked really cool. I thought it was really interesting that it was like a cast of her own face. So like even if she was covering her face with it, her face was in essence, in a way, still showing. Um, so you get to see some form of her still. Um, so yeah, that pretty much came together in that way, where like, and that's kind of how things would come about. It's very rare that like I would plan um, every last detail. I remember for like my very first exhibition that I was a part of, that was like one of the few times in my artistic career where like I had to plan every single thing, because I was actually shooting for that exhibition, and it was my very first exhibition, and I wanted to make sure everything went uh, just right, and I was very nervous. But aside from that, I kind of just like to leave the creative process as open as possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great feedback. I hadn't even considered that mask that she's holding in this photograph is a cast of her own face. So it is. You're right. That is an interesting kind of thing to think
And
about
I'm
with the title too.
and I'm also like I'm a I don't want to say like I'm a huge comic book fan, but like I'm a pretty decent comic book fan, and one of my favorite graphic novels is Watchmen, and there's a character, a pretty demented character in the novel by the name of Rorschach, and he had like this whole thing about him where like whenever he put his mask on, he felt like that was his true self. Whenever he had took the mask off, he wasn't himself anymore. Um, so that I think that me naming the piece was kind of like inspired by that, especially considering that like this mask actually was her face. So like when she put it on, she kind of felt like more of herself in my mind.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Is that a line from Watchmen? As a fellow geek, comic geek to another, I'm trying to remember if that actually
It is.
is.
It is not. I don't think it's a line from Watchmen, but I think I think when he has his mask ripped off, he's like yelling or screaming something about my face, give me back my face,
Sure.
something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So the works we have here in this particular exhibition are a sort of a smaller set of photos. I wanted to mention, I meant to do that at the beginning. So this started because you had this exhibition at the Krasl Art Center in St. Joseph, Michigan, which is about 120 or so miles south of Traverse City. And you had a larger show there. I think maybe it's probably 30 or 40 works.
20.
And 20, okay. And then I saw that, and I saw your talk on Facebook, and I sort of half jokingly said, "Hey, could we get this up here?" And actually, the staff there, Tammy and Julia, were really great to work with, and they made it happen. So I wanted to make sure we take a moment to thank the Krasl Art Center for helping us bring this up here.
Yes.
And we have a smaller portion of that, but I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that real quick with Krasl, how that came about, and how the choice of the works and that kind of thing.
Oh, well, Krasl, it's funny because as I said, my work at Krasl, was only my second solo exhibition. And my first one was in 2013. And my show at Krasel was last year, 2020. And I had been trying in a lot of ways to do another solo exhibition in New York, um, on a much bigger scale than my initial one, and things kept falling through. Things weren't working out in terms of like, you know, whether it be money or whatever. So I had kind of like given up on like trying to get a show done in New York. And I was kind of just like, you know, doing my life thing. And all of a sudden I got an email from Krasel, most likely Tammy, and she's said that she was interested in hosting my work there. And a lot of that work that's in the show that's at the Denos right now, well, all of that work that's at the Denos right now, I have not actually seen yet, because the work went straight from the printer to Krasel, and straight from Krasel to you guys. So I haven't seen it yet. And even the remainder of the work that got sent back to me from Krasel, I still haven't seen, because I had it sent to like a friend's place, and I haven't gone to check it out yet. So I haven't seen my own work yet. But I might change that today. But yeah, the selection process. This was a lot of the work that's in here was going to be in my the show that would have happened in New York if those plans came together. I was trying to do a show called Coloreds Only, because around that time, this was around that time I had done a lot of like my most colorful work. 20, 2013 or 14 is when I got my studio, and I got to like play around in the studio as much as I could. And so like I was trying a whole bunch of things out, and like color is one of those things that kind of just like became what I became known for.
Yeah, and that's actually that's kind of a great segue too. You're doing really good with this. It's like you know
Thank
what
you,
questions I'm
thank
going
you.
to ask next.
I'm reading your mind.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna bring up a slide so that I can move into my office space for this portion. But I wanted to talk about that aspect of color photography versus black and white. It's a long sort of, there's a sort of history to it, especially in museums, in terms of black and white being kind of considered artistic, and then color
Right.
photography being considered more commercial. And so I wanted to get kind of your thoughts, and what it is about color photography that is sort of attracting your work and your eye, because that's, I mean, when I saw this, the color is what really struck me, and I said, oh my gosh, what is this work? And I needed to know more about it. So I'm going to bring up one of the slides, and then just kind of let you sort of chat a little bit about that while I move spaces real quick.
One of my favorite artists is an artist by the name of Andy Goldsworthy, and he's a guy that he kind of makes natural sculptures. He does like a lot of work in nature where he's like putting things together with rocks and stone and leaves, and experimenting with like the colors of the leaves, and like playing around with ice, and stitching leaves together, or different colored leaves together, and just like allowing them to flow along flow along a river and stuff like that. So he has like this one thing that he does, or at least he used to do. I'm not sure if he does it anymore, but he used to do a lot of the times in his work, he would have like this this squiggly line formation that actually kind of like flowed and looked like a river. And I think he was asked like what attracted him attracted him to that, for it to be like such a recurring theme in his work. And if I remember correctly, he said he didn't know. He just likes it. That's kind of how I feel about color. Two things about my work that is quite common is saturated colors, and I tend to use heavy contrast. And there have been times when I would try to not do that because I would see other photographers' work, and their work wouldn't be as contrasted, or their colors wouldn't be as saturated. And sometimes I feel like my work can be a little, can feel a little cartoonish or too youthful, because of the color and the contrast. So like I would try to to implement different, to different practices, and just like, bring the saturation down a little bit and bring the contrast down a little bit. But every time I try to do that, I end up just like bumping it back up because I just can't help it. And that's just how, like, the image doesn't feel comfortable to my eye unless it's that way. And this image in particular, like, with Lamada, who I feel is kind of like a muse of mine. I don't think I've worked with any other model as much as I've worked with her. Um, and I love working with dancers because they're just so body conscious. Like they know how to uh, position themselves in front of a camera. And what was I saying? Uh, yeah, for this particular shoot, I had done a series of edits from this shoot, and I thought I was done, and I realized that the images. I wish I could show it to you guys. I don't even know where I would be able to find it now, but the images. I realized when I was done editing them that the images didn't look anything like how I saw her. Um, and her skin was kind of like looking kind of like orangish. I don't know if like I made some kind of like error in like the lighting and stuff like that. And in my mind, I was just like, she's dark skinned. Why doesn't she look dark skinned? Um, so like I had to, after editing, doing a first series of edits, I had to just like, and I sent her the images and everything. And I was just like, no, this isn't done. So I had to go back and just like really make sure I was able to show her the way that I saw her, which is like this beautifully dark melanated person. And of course, I think I might have even exaggerated that to a point, a little bit. Um, this is one of my favorite images. Like I think most of the people that love my work or know my work for Envy of the World. But Limada is probably one of my favorite pieces. And with this shoot, this was like the very first time that I actually used like dual tones, or like two backdrops at one time. Um, I gotta say that like every time I do a shoot, I still get nervous because like I never know how the shoot is going to turn out. I never know if the model is going to like the images. Um, and I still consider myself to be kind of like this self-taught person that doesn't feel like he knows what he's doing or whatever. So like I had this idea to like use two backdrops at once, and I was kind of scared of like how it would turn out because like these paper backdrops are very like difficult to uh, maneuver and work with on a practical level. So like I thought it was going to be a little wonky, but it ended up being very great. And it's one of the most successful images that I've taken using that, and just using those two complementary colors together, and what have you.
That was exactly what I was going to ask about. So again, you're reading my mind.
I think you're just saying that, Jason.
Yeah, right. No, I was gonna say, but tell me about these backdrops. Are they backdrops? Is it digital? Is it, are they actually those colors, or are you kind of manipulating that after the fact a bit, or that kind of thing?
I'm not that skilled digitally to just throw things back there. I mean, I could, but I don't think that they would look as good. So like these are all practical, real backdrops. These are paper backdrops, and say it to my face, they're actually it's actually a cloth. It's actually a fabric backdrop um, that I had gotten from a friend of mine. Um, so yeah, I used to have like tons and tons of rolls of, well, not tons, what am I saying? I'm lying. I used to have a bunch of rolls, probably like 3 or 4. um, and yeah, I again, like, I was in my first studio, so like I would just like do whatever I can and get whatever I could to kind of just like experiment and play around with things as much as possible. Um, and then every time I experimented, I was a nervous wreck during the entire shoot.
Sure. Well, let's bring up. You mentioned Envy of the World. Let me bring that one up. I think I have to stop the share and then redo this. So let me pull that up. With this one, I am curious because you mentioned you don't do a lot of the manipulation, digitally, but obviously this one has been in some way. And so I wondered
Yeah.
if you could talk a little bit about this and talk about why you think it's the image that a lot of people know from your work.
I guess I don't know. It's really kind of just like a feeling that you get from it. I mean, first of all, her face is striking. She's looking right at you, which is striking. Uh, those cheekbones are everything. Um, I okay, so I say this a lot when I talk about my editing process, and usually this is the image that I have in mind when I say this. But a lot of the times when I'm working, like I'll do a shoot and I don't necessarily know what I'm gonna do with it in terms of like post production, like the editing process, um, until I actually sit down with the work and start editing. And I kind of have to just like uh, I kind of have to become a fan of the, like, step outside of myself and become a fan of the work myself and just see what the image, what I'm getting from the image and what is it saying to me. Um, and the image kind of like tells me what to do with it. Um, with this particular image, the it just told me that like the only thing that you need to see here is the face. And I thought to myself, if I could just get rid of everything else, that would be great. So I just tried to do that, and it just so happened to be perfect. I don't necessarily, a lot of the things that I do that like this, um, I'll do it and I'll have no idea how I did it, to the point where like I don't think that I could recreate it as effectively if I tried it again. Which is a hindrance for me. Like it'll be the death of me. Uh, but yeah, so it just worked out perfectly that like the the shirt that she, or the jacket that she was wearing, kind of just like cut at her neck just so that it fit perfectly. And I just saw that this is what the image needed, and I tried what I could to make sure that that's what came out. I regard this as kind of like my Mona Lisa, like it's my Black Mona Lisa. Uh, um, so yeah, it's a very special piece. Again, it's one of the pieces that I became most known for. And I don't know if you can see, but like there's a skateboard deck back there with it, that I plan to make available on my website. I'm actually I have a print of it right here in front of me. So like it's a very big piece for me. The model in the piece is, I don't know if she wants me saying her real name, but her Instagram name is Owawa. Ohwawa. She's from Ghana. Um, and yeah, it's just one of those pieces that kind of just like has a long life.
Yeah, that's great. On the, when you were manipulating with this, did you use a palette of different colors for that background, or was it one of those things where you said, no, it needs to
Oh,
be in this
okay. So yeah,
orange, range?
yeah, that's a question that I get a lot. She was actually sitting in front of that background.
Okay,
The only thing that I did was remove the body, and where I removed it, I kind of just like replaced the color where her
gotcha.
body was. And interesting thing about that color, I'm really drawn to this color. Like this by no means is my favorite color, but what speaks most to me about this color is that if you close your eyes and you point your face directly towards the sun, that's the color that you see, or at least that's the color that I see. I don't know what everybody else sees. Um,
Mm.
so that's what I love most about this image, like to have such like a beautifully stark melanated woman, and just like have this like color of what the essence of the sun is to me, um, speaks volumes to me.
Yeah. Um, the other thing I wanted to ask a little bit about is, other kind of influences outside of your daily life or outside of photography.
Mhm.
And I think it, for me, and being in the art world, and there's over the last few years, there's been a lot of discussion about the painter Kehinde Wiley,
Mhm.
who uses this sort of elaborate patterned backgrounds with the figures in the foreground. And
Mhm.
of course, when you start thinking about him, you start thinking about Amy Sherald, who did the Michelle Obama portrait, right? And so you get these. I'm trying to think of what picture, but I guess this one, sort of the flat background. And so
Mhm.
I started thinking about those two artists. I don't know, on your end, are you looking at? Is it mostly kind of photographers and models on Instagram, or is there some fine art artists that you're sort of inspired by, or that you notice that your work parallels in some ways, or?
Um, I'm fans of a lot of different kinds of artists. I don't necessarily know how much their work influences me.
Sure.
I know like Kara Walker is one, Wengechi Mutu is one, uh, Kehinde Wiley is one. So there's a number of artists, um, uh, that I'm Phyllis Galumbo is another one. There's a number of artists that I deeply admire, and oftentimes I kind of like have a checklist in my mind about like, okay, I want to do something that's kind of like that. But I always feel like I never get around to it. And then like there are times when even if I do try to imitate someone, I end up like in me trying, I end up doing something completely different. Um, but yeah, those are some of my influences that I think I'm most inspired. I don't even want to use the word influenced, but I'm most inspired by films. Like I love Ron Frick from films, who he does work that's kind of like I don't know if you've heard of these films, but he has movies like Samsara and Baraka and Kronos. I think he was like the cinematographer for Koya Naskatsi, and like a lot of his film work is basically like they kind of feel just like moving images or just like stills, but like it's actually um, video work, and it's all like set to music, very interesting music, and it kind of just like has like a grand scope of just like the entire world. So I always say that it's like um, his films are like how God sees the world. Um, so like that, when I see things like that, it kind of like inspires me to just like do something, you know what I mean? Um, and it doesn't necessarily mean that like I want to do something like that, but it kind of just gives me like a little fire to just like want to create stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then I wanted to just spend a minute with this image, just because it's another one that I think, you see it, and it is a slide here, but when we see it in person, it really is this striking image with this dark background and the dark figure, and just the glint of the eye and the nose. And I was curious if you could just talk a little bit about, the process or the techniques that you were involved in creating this.
Okay, Jason, you're selecting the works that are like my personal favorite. Um, and because they're my personal favorite, and I have such like a special affection for them, like I often feel like people don't appreciate them as much as they should be appreciated. So, so the fact that you want to talk about them is great. Um, this piece is like really special to me because actually there's another image that has a similar, that's doing a similar thing behind me there. This was like the very first image that I did that was like that. And as per usual, that all started by accident. I was working with someone, um, and I was doing a couple test images first, and I noticed that the images came out really dark, um, which is generally like a no-no, but like there was something in them that I really liked. Like I could still see her, but I couldn't, and I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm really attracted to like really dark things. So I was just like, oh, this is really cool. So I took like a few more photos of her like that, and then since then I had in mind to kind of like do a series like that. And anybody that knows me knows that I don't really do series, but I felt so strongly about this that I was like compelled to like attempt to do a series of this. Some of the images work better than others, but this one that you're showing now, this was like the last one that I did, and I think it's probably um, one of the strongest ones out of that series. And the series is by no means complete. Like I still feel like I have more work to do in that regard. But anyway, by the time I finished that first image that's on my wall behind me, I kind of like came up like with this whole storyline um, behind the image, and I kind of just like saw like this whole world, um, and I kind of like wrote like a background for it, and you know I wrote it while I was at work one day, and like by the time I finished writing it, I kind of felt like I had written almost like a Bible verse or something like that. It's like this whole story about like the origin and the creation of the universe, and how everything came from darkness, or everything came from blackness, and how that was first. And the series was initially titled Heaven at Night, and it's a working title, but I still like Heaven at Night. Um, what do I call this one? This is At Night,
This
right?
one is called At Night. Yeah.
At Night, right. So yeah, so it's basically just it's typically when you think of like the story of heaven and religious figures and just like stories from the Bible and whatnot, we think of angels as like these white beings that are like cloaked in white robes and stuff like that. And it's just like uh uh just lightness and whiteness just flooding you. Um uh and I kind of just I saw these as like a new interpretation of that, and how like just this idea of like everything being black, including the angels, and that everything is just like completely perfect in its blackness, to the point where like you could barely even see them. You know what I mean? And but just because you can't see them doesn't mean that they don't exist, you know. And they're kind of just like working in the shadows, like in your favor, as kind of like guardian angels for you. um uh and I had like this whole thing about like the only time that you that you could even hope to have a glimpse of even seeing these beings is when you close your eyes. So you have to close your eyes and just like be in complete darkness in order for these beings to come to you and show themselves to you. So yeah, I wrote like this whole story about it. I felt so proud of myself for writing this, and I just love these images so much. This one in particular, this is the only one where like the eyes are blackened. This is probably like the most perfect like iteration of that series, or of that concept. Um, and yeah, I'm glad. I'm always happy to talk about it, because I wanna make more of it. Um, I want to do a whole show with it. And if they all could come out as great, because like I said, I'm nervous every time I try to do these things. But if they could all come out as great as this image came out, that would be wonderful. That would be perfect.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned earlier that, you know, cinematography, and then you've got this sort of story backdrop of these,
Yeah.
you know, this series of works. I mean, are
Oh
you
yeah,
someone who's interested in trying to do a film
oh, yeah, that was part of it also. But I also have
yeah,
no idea how I would even do that because everything would be black, basically.
right.
Like literally, the whole world is black. So I don't. It would. I imagine it working best as some sort of like animation.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure. But it would be really great if I could do like a live action. There's a movie with Scarlett Johansson called Under the Skin.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, it's been too long since I've seen it, but there is a still from it that I recently saw. I can't remember the context of it, but I think that she like once she sheds her skin, she's like this all black matte black being. Um, so that's probably like the closest interpretation of that I've seen on film. And like, yeah, I have like a whole uh concept in my head about it. And like when I first wrote this out, like I had like there were sounds playing and like from 2001 A Space Odyssey. Like this is also heavily influenced by by the monolith. Um
Mm.
because like I don't know if in Space Odyssey there's like a track that's playing. It's like this haunting track. I can't remember the name of it or who it's by, but I have it saved somewhere. And every time, like when I was writing it, that's what I was hearing. Uh, and like I always imagine that if I do a show, like that track would just be playing the entire time. But at the same time, it's a really disturbing track that like I don't, I can't imagine anybody wanting to spend a long time in that kind of environment with that playing the entire way through. So like it's a work in progress of like me trying to figure out how to best manifest that idea.
Sure. You might be surprised. There's people that are really into some things, so you could
Yeah,
find the right audience for that, I think.
sure.
Um, yeah, and it may be because I just watched that the HBO documentary, but I'm reminded too of Kerry James Marshall, and sort of he had, you know, 6 different blacks, and then he would paint the figures, and he'd say, see, it's all black, but it's you can still
Right.
make out you know, all the
Mhm.
pieces of the figure. That
Exactly.
it's sort of a similar kind of you know,
Yeah,
mind frame of that.
I personally get frustrated whenever I make something that's really dark and people complain that they can't see it. I'm just like, how can you not see it? It's right there in front of you, you know?
Sure.
So yeah.
Well, I have one other one I wanted to spend time with, and I did give you a heads up on this one. It's not in the show, but there
Mhm.
is this photograph called "Broken" from 2014 that is on the right here, with a figure sort of centrally located, and there's this fabric, patterned fabric around them. And then this is a work by Peter Drake, which is actually in our permanent collection, and it's called "Striped." And it is actually a drawing in mixed media. I think it's actually ink,
It's
but then
beautiful.
there's a sort of a process on top of it. Um, but I just wanted to kind of bring it up because again, the staff here, when we were looking at your work and what we ended up, you know, looking into, and we thought, wow, this image is so there's so many like similarities in a way, but it's obviously very different. And I
Right.
thought it'd be fun to just kind of bring it up and chat with you about it, and maybe get a sense of I don't know much about Peter's work. I know he is also based in New York, and he's been around many years. He's still around. But just kind of
I'll,
get your sense of what your thoughts were on this photograph and seeing this image as well.
I'll have to look him up. Uh, I don't know if I have that much to say about this one. It was kind of like so much of my stuff. It was like a thing that kind of just like happened. I do remember feeling like when I took this, I felt like this is like a really great shot. Um, that fabric that's used is like the very first roll of fabric that I ever purchased for a photo shoot. And that being the case, I used to try to incorporate it in as many photo shoots where it worked as much as I could. Um, but you know, it's this is I do something in this shot that I don't do often, which is like I had to like she sat down on the fabric and she did this like bent over pose, and like you get to see like her spine being exposed, and I thought that was like really cool. Um, and I had to like stand up on like a tall stool in order to just like get this image in the best way that it could be got. Um, yeah, it's I love this piece. Whenever I think about like doing a show, it's always one of those pieces that like I feel like would look great on a wall, and that I have to like put that in the running, and then I have to like make sure this piece is included. Um, but I don't necessarily know if it has like a special significance to me, other than the fact that like I just really like how it looks, you know?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And is the fabric is it a gray, black and white fabric, or is this a black and white photograph of a
No,
colored fabric?
it's a black and white fabric for sure.
Yeah. 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 And I it was just one of those things where we sort of saw that connection imagery wise. And if you look at Peter's more recent work, it is very much full color. I don't know that I was looking at too much that was still black and white. So kind of a similar trip to follow between the two of you.
Right.
But I'm also kind of, I think, given maybe the titles, right? So yours is titled Broken, and then his is titled Stripes or Striped. Um, and you get a sense that in Peter's work that it's almost like she's sleeping, or kind of a relaxed kind of position,
Mhm.
although it is a strange position to be found, sleeping, I think. But whereas yours, I think it feels there's a little more of a tension to it, right? There's
Yeah.
with the way the legs are there, and then you think of stretching and kind of a tension to it. So I thought
Mhm.
that was interesting that even though they share some similarities in imagery, that I think the theme or the concept behind it are contrasted actually.
Yeah, I get what I get from Broken is that this person is in some kind of turmoil or despair. Um, that's kind of like where she's I feel like she's kind of like at the lowest point, um, which is why I titled it Broken. And then like there's also like I really just love like the fact that uh, well there's another piece that was paired with this at Crazzle, which doesn't have the fabric in it, but like it's the same model, and she's standing and she's bent over, um, having her back exposed, and that one is called Bent, I believe. And just like these it's really just like the exposure of the back that kind of like uh really like stands out to me and speaks to me. A lot of these titles I don't come up with until like years later. So I, like again, like I really have to kind of just like stare at the work and determine what the work is like saying to me. Um, but this one, rather than just being bent, this one actually felt like she was broken, and she was like in some kind of like uh, down and out phase of her life.
Sure. Yeah. And so that kind of wraps up at least my end of things, some things that I wanted to make sure we had a chance to talk about. And I want to make sure we give chance for people who are tuning in, if they have questions about the work or for Dex. I'm wondering if you have ever considered or actually paired your photographic art with your spoken word compositions.
Um, Not in any like official capacity. Like I don't have a book or anything. Um, uh, well, you're asking specifically about spoken word, so I'm going to assume that maybe you mean like if of me like performing the work. I've never considered that, uh, but if or when I do actually put a book together, it's been a thought in my mind to incorporate some poetry in there, some of my work in there. But I say not in an official capacity because I do it sometimes on Instagram. So a lot of times when I would post work on Instagram, I would just like dig back into like my old Rolodex of poems in my head and just like try to like excerpt lines from there to kind of like add some weight to the work.
Sure. Speaking of that, you know, if folks are wanting to follow you on Instagram, what is your handle there?
My Instagram is Sir Dex R Jones. That's SIRDEX Jones, Jones.
Linda asks, "Is your work for sale?" And it is.
Yes, the work there at Dennis is available for sale at Dennis, and I have also work available on my website. And again, I want to mention that like these Envy of the World skateboard decks that are in the background will soon be available on my website. If there are any skateboarders out there, or if you just want a skateboard deck to hang on your wall decoratively.
Yeah, we actually hosted a show I helped organize about six years ago of skateboard decks, where we let the community paint them and send them out, and we put them in the galleries, and so if we do that again or something similar, I'll be sure to keep your name on our list of folks, because we had professional kind of, you know, working artists display some work alongside the community's skateboard, you know, paintings. So it was really kind of cool.
Yeah, skateboard deck is a great medium to keep your art on.
He says, "I enjoyed your comment before lightness there was dark. In your work or practice, do you consciously try to question normally accepted," and that's in quotes, "normally accepted metaphor? Example, the notion that light is more desirable than darkness."
Oh yeah, like my work is all about that. The fact that Envy of the World is entitled Envy of the World, I think speaks to that. And it's also why like it I call it the black Mona Lisa. I also call it the black pearl, in terms of like it's kind of like the black girl with the pearl earring. To kind of just like challenge these notions or ideas that like, you know, these conventionally accepted white works of art by these white artists are not shouldn't necessarily be the only placeholders for that kind of status, and that like contemporary Black artists are doing things in a similar way today, and always have been. One of my favorite artists actually is Charles Henry Joseph Cordier. He does like he's done like a lot of like well-crafted Black sculptures of Black figures, and I don't know. The first time I saw them, I saw some of them in person when I was in Paris, and I was kind of just like blown away just at how just that they even existed, because it's probably like I'm not familiar with the dates, but it's probably like a century or so old, and I had no idea that like these Black figures that were so well crafted were even a thing, and that they were like centuries old, you know. So yeah, like that, when I saw that, that kind of just like blew my mind and challenged my whole idea of things. So like I kind of like to try to do that as well, like, and not even necessarily just like in my work, but also like in conversations. Sometimes I feel like there's only so much that I can do or say with my work. But I do think about these things a lot, and I try to incorporate those ideas in my work as much as I possibly can. I just want to thank you, Jason, and thank you, Craig, and thank you, Dennis, for giving me the opportunity and the platform to showcase my work and to just like have this conversation with you guys, especially in these strange times that we're living in. So I'm just really grateful, especially like I said, like I haven't been creating as much, and honestly, like being able to showcase my work, to actually have my work printed and exist in a physical, tangible space in the real world uh, is really what excites me the most about creating. I create so that it can exist and so that people can see it. So the fact that you guys um, are helping facilitate that really means the world to me, and I'm very grateful. And I want to thank all the people that tuned in and made comments and asked questions. Really appreciate just being here and my work being here.